Hi, I'm Dawn Marie Solis, and I'm with INIS 2022 Neurodiversity Conference, and I am really happy to be speaking with Brian King right now. He is an author and a speaker, is neurodivergent himself, and has a lot to share. And we decided one of his most powerful points is how he talks about mining the riches of adversity. And so I think that's probably where we're going to focus. Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
An absolute pleasure, Don. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. What got you started? I think you told me you discovered your neurodivergent identity as an adult. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was around the same amount of time that my oldest was diagnosed with Asperger's.
Okay. So was it what people were saying about him that sort of turned the light bulbs on for you? What was that journey for you?
Well, I grew up in a family of undiagnosed spectrumites and ADHD folks. So it was normal to us, all of his eccentric behavior. It wasn't until he started school and went into crisis that the teachers started seeing red flags for autism spectrum and then brought it to my attention.
Okay. I'm so sorry that he struggled in school for a bit. That's never fun as a parent. My goodness, we just don't want to see our kids having a hard time. So you and your family were just kind of like happily going along. Now you have these new ideas. But from the conversation you and I had, I didn't get the sense that you saw this as a negative in any way.
I don't now.
Okay.
My attitude, my belief system has evolved over time as so many other things have been thrown on my plate, including physical disability. So I had to learn more and more how to be resourceful and resilient and self-compassionate because more things were happening to discourage me, and I was getting bogged down by those things. And I had 3 sons, still do, that are looking to me for how to live life. How do I do this thing, Dad? How do I do this with all the challenges I have? Well, I can't look at you because you're self-defeating and negative and pessimistic, and I didn't want to be that. So I knew I needed to figure out how to not just talk the talk, but to model it. So that required me to do my own work. And that's why I started finding the riches within the adversity, is by going through the heartache and the pain and the grief and everything that was necessary in order to be able to look within without being afraid.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really missed as a parent, because I didn't know my own neurodivergent identity, I didn't know that of my children until we were all adults. I really missed the thinking that you just talked about. There was so much about parenting that was hard for me. Anxiety producing, I was so fearful for my children's well-being. I hated the way they were treated by other people, by the schools, but I didn't have the language, I didn't have the knowledge, I didn't have any of that in order to more appropriately approach those dilemmas and difficulties. And so I feel like that's something that I really, really missed, though my kids and I are certainly making up time for it. They're all in their 20s somewhere. But I do think that that's an important thing. You had this opportunity to not only know your children, but to know yourself.
Well, the opportunity is always there. It's just a matter of you determining for yourself that that's something that's lacking. Because far too often parents will tell themselves, I got it together, I'm doing fine. What matters most is my child, and I'm going to martyr myself and think it's righteous. And in our culture, burnout is something to aspire to, the hustle culture. But people don't far too often offer you the alternative to that. They'll say, well, you got to take a break. You need to rest. You need to do some self-care. They don't get too specific. Well, what I've discovered is that for every gold nugget there's a lot of dirt and sand and rock, and they coexist. So to think that you have to have one or the other, and that if you have some rough times, it's indicative of failure or a universe conspiring against you. No, it's the dirt and the gravel and the rock and everything that you need to navigate through before you find the gold nugget. So understanding that these two are not in opposition, they're in cooperation, in collaboration. It's the dirt and everything that holds the gold in place, so that you can even find it. And in Buddhist thinking, one of the biggest and most important symbols is the lotus flower, because it has this beautiful blossom. It sits on top of the water, while several feet down, it's in the mud in the bottom. So the saying is, no mud, no lotus, no suffering, no wisdom. So it's important to understand that they work together. So if there is pain, there is also the absence of it. If there's sadness, there's also joy. And you can find them simultaneously. You don't require one to end for the other to show up. I was just writing today how often it is that we're feeling sad, and yet we have self-talk that is very encouraging. Oh, come on, Bri, cheer up. You've been through this before. You know it's going to be okay. Well, how can those two coexist? Well, maybe because I have all those parts inside me. But when we're encouraged to think, oh, I'm sad, or I'm really angry right now, we trick ourselves into thinking that all of us is this. All of me is angry. All of me is sad. No, part of you is. But part of you is also optimistic. Part of you is also resourceful. And if I bring that into it, suddenly I've got more to work with. There are riches, there's gold inside that, all over, but we're not taught to look for it. But it's there.
I think that you, in that wonderful explanation, sort of scooped up one of my questions for you. How do you not sort of lean over into what we might call today toxic positivity? And I think you just answered that. It's by not trying to erase the hard or pretend the hard isn't there and just, smile and beam, but to recognize the coexistence. I refer to my emotions kind of like other people in my being. And I talk about sad being at my shoulder all the time. I don't have, my earliest childhood memory is with that companion. I've been companioned my whole life. And
well, not to minimize it, but to never be alone as a child, but your companion was that. Because sometimes we feel, oh, I always felt so alone as a child. Well, technically, my companion was sadness. Mine was anxiety.
Yeah, I think possibly one of my favorite movies ever is the Pixar / Disney Inside Out.
Isn't that just, that tugs at my heart every time I watch it.
Yeah, for me, it was like somebody put my inner being on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that character of sad, or the character of angry, there's even an anxiety character, right? Yours and my inner being were on that screen in that film. But none of them were to be rejected. None of them were to be, the healing moment is when joy decides everybody is important. That's when things start to get better for the little girl in the film. Yeah. And that's what happened for me. And it sounds like that's what happened for you when you began to realize that you didn't have to only be what was hard. You could also be the other parts of you at the same time.
Well, and the one word that encapsulates all that is human. And my adult purpose has become learning how to connect with the human side of me much more authentically, seamlessly, so that I can just show up and be fully human and me not have any resistance to that. And for living with all of these issues, the neurodivergence and the physical disabilities, there's plenty of opportunity to feel awkward, different, to compare. And it's not that I don't do it. It's when I do it, I catch myself and then remind myself that, yeah, there is ground here for comparing and thinking less of myself. There's also opportunity for this other part here, to think of myself as contributing something unique that this other person may be missing in their life. So I find my way to see it as an asset, but I also see how it can be problematic. But the two can coexist. It's like the head and tail of a coin. You know, the sunrise and the sunset, and all points in between. There's a continuum of every human experience. You know, it's a matter of kind of knowing where you exist outside the black and white thinking that tends to be encouraged not only by our culture. You know, you're either on the winning team or the losing team. You know, you're the insider or an outsider, and then you're neurodivergent or you're, quote, neurotypical. You know, those very divisive distinctions really muddy the conversation. So I've kind of leaning towards a way of thinking about community so that all of us are included. And human being, kind of hard to define somebody that's human and not included in that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really, really hope comes out of Innis 2022 is exactly what you're talking about. When I set out to figure out, this conference happened because I went looking for this conference and couldn't find it.
See, you're a doer. You're not sitting on the sidelines waiting for someone to come along and solve the problem. You're like, where are my pads? I'm going in.
Yeah. And I have to say that within the neurodivergent community, that's where I find the most support for how I am, because other people look at it as nuts, right? Like, what are you doing? Who's going to listen to you? You're nobody, right? I've gotten all that feedback my whole life. And there have definitely been times where I have taken that to heart and sat with it and lived it, but it's not who I am. And I think one of the things that the pathologizing of neurodivergence and the disorder and all of those things does to us is create this problem first approach. And if I don't feel like I can overcome the problem, then what do I do? Where somehow I was naturally born with, and I think a lot of autistic and ADHD people are kind of born with this idea of, well, if you can't do it this way, maybe you can do it another way. And I hear that sort of coming from you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not that we ignore things that we feel less able or unable about, but okay, fine. But there's still something I could probably do. There's still something I'm going to be good at, something I'm going to be capable of. What do I do with that stuff? Am I hearing you correctly?
What I have found, what you were just parroting back is what I think. What I typically find people on the spectrum, and a lot with ADHD leaning towards, is if I can't figure out how to solve the problem on my own, then it can't be solved. Because they're so reluctant to ask for help or to consider other alternatives because then it means they're wrong, and being wrong equals being bad. So they don't even want to entertain that line of thinking. So they think of it in terms of independent or failure. And what I've evolved to is that I shut myself out of life by deciding to believe that asking for help is weakness and so on. Because people that are on the spectrum, and people in general, tend to believe what their brain tells them. So learning to question what your brain is telling you, noticing that it's just another event, right? Like a feeling, an emotion, or anything like that. And to look at it and ask yourself, what are my first impressions? And am I going to go with that? because a lot of the first impressions can be fear-based. They can be reactive, but it doesn't mean it's telling you the truth. It's just giving you some information, some feedback on an experience, and you can decide how you're going to use that. And I've made a point of using it in a way that provides opportunities instead of one more thing to feel held back by, one more thing to feel victimized by. I would much rather see it as a springboard. And that's been a process. I didn't wake up one day and say, from now on, this is my mindset. I'm going cold turkey from all negativity, and I'm going to march forward, this incarnation of Leo Buscaglia or whoever it is. I just set myself to have a very grounded, practical, but also proactive, solution-focused, optimistic way of living.
I'm glad that you gave a little tweak to what I had said. I do think, especially us autistic folks, because our brains are designed for pattern repeatability, we tend to be a little rule devout, right?
Yeah, we tend to be over-reliant on certainty.
Yes. Yeah, I like that way of putting it very, very much. And that idea that not being able to be completely 100% right within our own brains, independent within our own bodies and environments, I think some of that can come from the outside world, and the outside brains don't feel trustworthy to us. So how do I ask that not very trustworthy, not very stable, very changeable, lacking in pattern and routine world for help? They're going to break me, which happens over and over and over again, right? People find that the folks who are supposedly there to help them aren't always the ones doing the best job. And that's not to criticize anybody's desire to do the best job, anybody's heart.
Well, no, we're not mind readers.
Yes. So how would you help somebody figure out that balancing act of, yeah, figure out your own stuff? Certainly that's a great skill that we all have. However, we all are human, like you said, and we all need some help. Where do you find the resilience to approach asking for that help when so many times that help seems to be not the best, sometimes hurtful, even traumatic?
I have declared that I'm a treasure hunter in this life, which means I fully expect to be in a wagon that is in the worst weather and the worst terrain, and that there's going to be rattlesnakes and cacti and all these other things that get in the way. But my job is not to try and control the terrain. I can't control the terrain. I can control my objective, my perseverance, the fact that I'm holding in my mind the fact that out there is that treasure at the end of it. And when it comes to people, the treasure is the one who says, yes, I can help you. So everyone else is a cacti, a boulder, or something else that is on the way to the person that's going to say yes. So one of the rules to that process is ask until. Because we like rules, so I got rules too. Ask until.
I love that. So I'm having so many thoughts right now. I have often explained, a lot of people will have what I call a junk drawer. That's a drawer in your kitchen or your garage or somewhere in your home where there's all the random stuff, the rubber bands and the paper clips and the batteries and the pens that you don't seem to have a different place for.
Mm-hmm.
They're all in the junk drawer, right? But you kind of know what's in the junk drawer. You have the twist ties there. You have, right? You kind of know what's in there. So when you need a thing, you go, oh, You need to go look in the junk drawer. If you get distracted by all of the things that you do not need, you'll get overwhelmed. You'll feel like you're frustrated. You'll feel like you can't find it. But if you stay focused on, I'm not looking for all of the other things. I'm only looking for, that red pen that I need right now. Then nothing has to really change about the drawer. It's still useful. Everything in that drawer is still useful, just not right now, right? I don't have to throw everything out except for the one red pen, because later I'm going to want that random battery or that paper clip, right? But right now I need the red pen. So I love that analogy of treasure hunting, in that you kind of know what you're looking for, but there might be a lot of stuff to drive over, ride around, bump over.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise. In your own head as a neurodivergent, all the intrusive things that just keep showing up to try and throttle you. But when you remember what it's all for, and ultimately the fact that on the other end is a shiny object, treasure, it's what you're after the whole time. It helps you maintain perspective, but it also helps keep you focused. Because you don't want to proceed with the perfectionistic attitude of, okay, it's got to work. It's got to work the first time without any frustration. Otherwise, it's a failure. No experience is that pristine. We don't live in a vacuum. So having some paradigm that allows you to anticipate, it's going to be a rough journey, but you know what? That's okay. It's that way by design.
Do you have an experience from your own life that you feel like you followed your own advice and you gained something from it that you could share?
Well, there are times where I needed to be reminded of what I already know, because I also had cancer when I was 18.
Oh, wow.
And that's one of the things that has made me as tenacious as I am. One of my rules is I don't do helpless. So I always believe that there's a solution somewhere. There's always an action I can take to improve my circumstances, even if that action is simply to choose hope when there's not a whole lot of evidence to it. So I think in recent years, what's given me reason to use my own thinking is being diagnosed with MS in 2017, having increased symptoms, going from walking to wheelchair, and all of those changes, me having to grieve what I had just lost, and me focusing in a lot on what opportunities still exist, or what opportunities do I have that I really could lean more into now. And what I found is my body doesn't allow me to go on nature trails and hike and go on beaches and stuff. I still have this capacity to create experiences with my imagination and with my use of language and so on. So I'm doing a lot more with speaking and writing these days.
I really appreciate that you shared that. Thank you so much. Earlier today, I was talking to two women in Australia who are researchers, and they're looking at quality of life as autistic people age. And one of the things we talked about was that their research was going to be able to be kind of backwards compatible, right? The things that they are finding are going to be information for people's entire lives. And one of the things that they are looking at very closely is the importance of the special project mindset of an autistic person. Where is our highest interest? What are we willing to focus on for hours and hours and hours? And that for the aging population, for older people, those mindsets can be exceptionally valuable, keeps the brain active, it keeps them engaged, it keeps them interested. There's so much good about that. But we have a society, at least here in the United States, that tends to disregard or even shame that idea of hyper focus and extra interest and all of that. But with what you were just saying, it takes me back to that conversation, because your ability to turn to other things that you're good at means nobody shamed you into an idea that you can only be one thing. Nobody, yeah, go ahead.
That was the joy of being raised by a mother with raging undiagnosed ADHD. Because she did something very similar. She was always starting things and stopping them, and she indulged a lot of my whims as a kid. So that really taught me the value early on of sampling different experiences. And the things that I was interested in were things like theater, learning mime and learning how to do impressions with my voice. So I learned early on that there were so many different capacities just my body had or my imagination had. But like you pointed out, people weren't encouraging that. She was one of the few, because everybody else was like, be quiet, don't be so disruptive, pay attention, take notes. Everything was about sit there, shut up, and don't inconvenience the person at the front of the room. It's not exploring who you are and what your contribution is ultimately going to be.
I had an amazing experience, probably close to 20 years ago now. I went to a Montessori school that's in Texas for a Montessori experience. They were, at the time, one of only 4 K-12 full school experience for using Marie Montessori's ideas. Mm-hmm. And I had a very hard time with the first part of the experience, where you walk through all of the classrooms silent and you're not allowed to talk to anybody. You can touch everything, you can, be part of those classrooms, but you don't discuss what's going on with you. And I walked into their 3rd and 4th grade room, which was all windows, and they looked out into the courtyard, which I thought was beautiful, but there were these little individual desks that were pointed out of the classroom. And I started to panic. I saw those as punishment, because whenever you put somebody out, they're punished. And so we gathered at the end of that experience. We'd been through all the classrooms, and they're like, does anybody have anything to say? And my hand was like almost off my body in the air so fast. And I said, I don't like that room. What's up with those desks looking out the window? And the woman said, no, if a child feels overwhelmed or they need to step away or they would work better looking out the windows, we've provided them spaces. And she pointed out other ways the room was designed for a child to be able to do them. Right? There was space for more activity, space for more seclusion. There were all of these spaces in the room, and all of a sudden I went, it had never occurred to me. And I was, I had all 3 of my children. I was well into my adult life. It had never occurred to me that a classroom could be designed for who a child is.
And it's curiosity versus curriculum driven.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the Montessori model done well. But I bring that up because to me, part of what I'm hearing from you is when we can be nurtured in a way that allows us to be ourselves and doesn't tell us to just sit down and be quiet and conform and, fit into this box that we don't fit into. Really beautiful, life-sustaining things happen. Because you had your mom, you've had a different life trajectory than had you had somebody who was very strict about, no, you can't be you. You have to fit into society this way.
That was more so the teachers and the extended family. Whenever there was a get together, I had one uncle that would criticize me openly, about how weird I was. And people would largely not talk to me. They would talk about me or around me. And for whatever reason, all of the women only had outdoor voices. So even when we were inside, we know who they were talking about and what they were saying and what their opinions were. And it was all so uncomfortable. I lived in a bubble where there were some creative types that entered my life on occasion and saw the virtue of me spread my wings a little bit, encouraged my creativity. Those were the ones I really felt understood by. And then everybody else was, no, this is how you toe the line. This is how you be the good little boy. And then this is how you people please, and so that you will be included.
Yeah, that inclusion thing.
See, the problem is this. Inclusion, the way it exists today, does nothing to educate all of the stakeholders in how do we support one another. It has more to do with how do we tolerate being in the same space together. You know, that's useful for a subway or an elevator, but not an education environment.
Yeah, not a work environment
Right.
or a play environment or really any type of environment or relationship we're going to have other than that elevator ride.
There's like three, I love the metaphor of the three-legged stool. You know, it's you, me, and we. So whenever you meet someone, it's, you know, learn about how they do themselves. Then you explain how you do you. Then if you two want to carry on and create some kind of a friendship or so on, then you have the conversation about how do we do us, you, me, and we. Because, you know, there's that friend that you always get in trouble with when you sit side by side, right? There's the one who maybe you like to go fishing with. You know, not every person fits the same bill, but when you're together, there's a we that is created, a partnership that's unique to the two of you. And that's negotiated. But nowadays, especially if you're neurodivergent, you got one person calling all the shots. I'm not interested in a we. I'm interested in the you do things the way I like it. And you end up trying to create a mini version of you. Teachers do it, parents do it, bosses do it. I'm going to mold you into the persona that's a very small snapshot of the totality of who you are. One of the things I couldn't tolerate about my last job was how little of myself I was allowed to use because of my job description. And now that I've been working on my own for a very long time, I can use everything. And it's so much more fulfilling.
So you found out that your oldest was neurodivergent when he was little. And then I think you told me that the other two are as well. Is that correct?
Right?
So you had this wonderful house of beautifully unique individuals. A book that I'm working on right now is I Love My Children, I Hate Parenting. And it's about my experience before understanding all of our neurodivergence and how I can change that perspective now that I know. But I still think that it's of value to acknowledge where parenting as a neurodivergent comes with its own benefits and challenges. It isn't all roses, even if you know, and even if you have help, but it also has these incredibly gorgeous moments. Would you be, because you did know about yourself and about your kids, could you talk about that a little bit? What that experience of parenting was, the good, bad, and beautiful?
Well, the reality is when you're a parent, everything you do with a child is for the first time. You know, and I tell my kids this all the time, you know, well, didn't you go through this with my older brother? And I said, yeah, I did. But this is the first time I've had to parent you at this age in this situation. You are your own person. We are learning together. You know, so one of the things that I learned, and I don't remember when it clicked, but that my job is not to be the end all be all with all the answers and know what to do. My job is to know how to be resourceful and curious and teach my child to problem solve. They don't learn how to problem solve if I'm like this transactional dispensary of all the answers. They need to learn how to identify the problem and figure out what solution they want, and then figure out what is the step that they need to take and who do they need to reach out to. That's all executive function stuff. And that's all stuff that I struggled with and still struggle with. But I figured if we learn it together, they'll see me struggle. They'll see me be okay with the struggling. They'll see me be enthusiastic about self-advocacy because I'm modeling it and doing it with them. I'm partnering with them. So that gave me permission to go easier on myself as I'm teaching them to go easier on themselves. And in spite of the fact that I've written 5 books now, I've lectured all over the world on this stuff, I still mess up parenting my kids.
Thank you for saying that.
Okay? Because I'm not a mind reader. That doesn't come in any of the books, right? We're not always in perfect sync in terms of our awareness and empathy and being tuned into our child. Sometimes we're caught up in our own stuff. And those two don't happen to, meet at the same time. And you screw up, or you say something you didn't think through as well as you would have liked, or you assume something when you wished you'd clarified. Mistakes happen. And a big part of the skills are, how do you apologize? How do you move on? How do you do all of that repair stuff that's part of being connected with another human being? But under no circumstances is your performance being measured against perfection.
Yeah, I don't even know what perfection would look like. I don't.
It's imaginary. It's like a unicorn.
Yeah, it's such a myth, but I think we can get so caught up by it, and in part of what we were talking about in the beginning. When we have brains that are maybe their happiest when things are repeatable and understandable and predictable and all of that stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what, when they're repeatable and predictable, they're safe.
Right.
And when you're walking around with anxiety as your default setting, everything feels like a threat. So, and perfectionism is very much akin to wanting that repetition and that certainty, because the idea of perfectionism, it's like Neverland. It's a mythological place where criticism doesn't exist. And we are so used to being beaten up and belittled and second guessed. Could we just have one moment where everybody was happy with us? And that's what perfectionism gives you. The sad thing is, it's never going to happen. So we need to learn how to be okay with good enough and realize that we are good enough regardless of the outcomes.
Yeah, I feel like we should put that on repeat on like some kind of international speaker.
Turn it into a ringtone and just let the call go for a little bit there. Don't let it go to voicemail so you hear it go over and over again. You're good enough. You're good enough. You're good enough. Who's calling you? Shh. I'm listening to my ringtone.
Listening to my ringtone. I think especially when it comes to parenting, I was aware before I had children I was going to mess my kids up, because I never saw a parent who didn't mess their kid up, right? So my oldest, who's now almost 30, literally started telling them when they were like 2, I am going to mess you up. I'm really sorry, but I am doing the best I can. And it's sort of provided this environment for my kids.
That is one of those signs. You always have those, home sweet home, or those really like earthy country themed.
Yeah.
You need one that says what you just said.
Yeah.
I'm gonna mess you up, but I'm really trying the best I can. I want that sign.
And I think one of the things we face as neurodivergent people in this world that really has no idea about how we function and what we're capable of, because we're looked at as disordered and disabled first. There's unfortunately a number of folks who don't believe autistic people should have children or are capable of having children capable of even having relationships. There's so much bad information out there about who we are
Well,
and what we're capable of doing.
and let's look at how backward society is in its thinking, that you need to be able to live in a community as though you don't belong to one, because we're all mind your own business, stay in your yard. We don't talk to neighbors anymore. It's all this we're alone together garbage, and you have to be independent. That is the problem. The problem isn't that people with autism or ADHD, whatever, can't do it. It's that we need to do it how we were meant to do it, within a supportive community. But success is too often seen as, no. That's not how you do it. You stay within the parameters of your personal property. It's so backwards.
Yeah, again, the researchers I was talking to today, they were talking about how autistic people are often labeled as lacking in social skills or even antisocial, not really wanting social relationships and things like that. And that their research is actually proving that totally inaccurate.
I can speak to that. What so much of it boils down to is that the way we learn how to do social things, we need through deliberate, direct instruction. We don't pick it up through osmosis or through modeling. I've used the word modeling a lot, but the way I model is so explicit and direct. It's not like I'll just do it in the room and they can't help but notice what I'm doing. I've had to add some extra stuff to it to make sure it gets in, but it's very, very effective. And as far as relationships goes, one of the reasons I'm as good as I am with relationships now is because I've been obsessed with connection since I was a kid, because it was the one thing I screwed up the most. I couldn't figure out how to get the other kids to want to play with me. I couldn't figure out how to communicate to the teacher what the issue was. I sure as heck wasn't comfortable looking within myself because I hated what I saw. So I wanted to figure out why everybody was happy with each other and could seamlessly move from, one social spot to another. How do you do that? So I set out to answer that question, and I just keep learning more and more and more. Now I can do it, and I teach other people with neurodiversity how to do it. And it's all been very hard won, making one mistake after another until I finally figured it out. But it isn't because of lack of desire that people give up on it. It's because lack of the most effective way for them to internalize these things so that they can turn around and duplicate it effectively over and over and over again. And the majority of people who picked it up through osmosis don't know how they learn these things. So they can't turn around and teach it. So hopefully there are more folks out there that are neurodivergent who have learned it the hard way, can articulate, here are the specific places where you're likely going to have resistance. This is likely the kind of thinking you're doing that's preventing you from moving beyond it. This is what you can think instead so that you can move forward. The more of us that are doing this, who can get into the nooks and crannies and the minutia where things get hung up like the little pebble in your shoe. It's small, but man, does it mess things up. So if you can go in there and you can tweak it, things can be much better.
Yeah, and I think along with that comes a real need for acceptance of difference. That, even making sure we're not bringing any of that perfectionist mindset to our well-honed duplication of social norms or whatever, right? We want to make sure that we don't end up then accidentally rejecting those who aren't going to be able to do that quite so seamlessly, right? And that we value. I would love to see our society value the natural directness of the autistic person, the natural honesty and forthrightness of the autistic person, because I personally believe if we valued that, we'd have better interactions all the way around, neurodivergent or not. Directness and honesty, I think, are incredibly useful skills.
Mm-hmm. One step in the direction towards that is learning to depersonalize the events of life and do more observing of them. And the metaphor that comes to mind is, let's say you have a bucket of water. Which drop of water is the most important one?
There isn't one. They're all in the bucket.
Right. And they're all drops of water. So if you have all of these people and there's all this energy moving around in the form of words and statements and stuff, it's affecting a lot of the water, not just you. So for you, for one moment to think, well, I'm the most important water and I'm the one who's most directly affected by this, that's just all nonsense. It doesn't change the reality of things. So if you are able to realize it's not me, it's us, it's this experience I'm having that I'm observing and taking in, instead of fixating on, well, that was rude, well, that was an odd word usage, and overthinking, overanalyzing, the easier it is to handle things like direct talk. Because you're not thinking about all the ways it's about you. You're more intrigued by the information.
That's a really cool perspective. I coach emotional intelligence, and we have to start with, what are your own emotions telling you? How can you use them appropriately? But we have to go to, what is the other person? And it's that ability to both know yourself and learn about someone else that creates a more in balance, harmonized self. We become out of balance emotionally and intellectually when we become overly inwardly focused. But we are equally out of balance if we've been taught the people pleasing, only think about someone else, you're not important, right? So there has to be, and that sort of circles back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. It does take community, or it does take relationship, interconnectedness, to be balanced within ourselves. Our best, most self-focused, selfish space is actually inclusive of others. In the way I coach, we are not taking our best care of ourselves when we become hyper focused on all the things that seem externally hurtful, because then we don't get the answers. You were talking about, seeking information, seeking to understand. And it's in that seeking to understand self and other that we find a balanced, whole individual.
There's one more piece. There's
Okay.
understanding self, other, and together.
Right. Your three-legged stool.
A three-legged stool. Because there are some people who can walk through life thinking that their presence is not impactful. I'll keep my eyes down and nobody will talk to me and whatever. I feel other people's anxiety. I'm a total super empath. And if my wife says everything is fine, I know that she's actually anxious. So I can be in a space with people that are in a hurry, that are angry about something that happened earlier in the day, and I feel all of it. So don't think that just because you're not saying anything, that you're not having an impact out there in the world.
Yeah, and then once we understand our presence is impactful, we can become more choice-focused, more deliberate about the impact we would like to have. But again, I think because that outside world is, again, so unpredictable, so out of our control, it can feel almost impossible. Okay, fine, Dawn Marie. Yeah, I'm going to choose to have an impact, right? And then everybody's going to yell at me again. So I'm going to, I'm sorry you can feel my anxiety, but I'm going right back into my shell.
Well, see, then I had this conversation with my clients a lot around, why should I be kind when people aren't kind back? And I said, well, what does somebody else's response have to do with whether you choose to bring more kindness in the world? So why do you do it? Do you do it because you want to be treated kindly, or do you want to do it because you want more kindness in the world? And they say, well, I want more kindness in the world. I said, well, then you've been successful the moment you put it out there. Anything else after that is somebody else's problem. So I said, if this person decides to respond in kindness, that's great. And if they take in the kindness, imagine how many more people are going to benefit than if they would have gone to work grumpy because you kept it to yourself. So that's one way your simple act of kindness impacts other people you're never going to meet, because it changes the state of that person because you decided to show up in a very simple human way. That's impactful. And you don't have to be on a stage or win the lottery or be an influencer or anything like that. You just need to be a compassionate human being.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking a little bit beyond this scope. Bringing more kindness into the world, yes. A big piece of Innis and why we're not really doing presentations and we're not doing speakers in the traditional sense, but we're doing conversations, is so that our humanness steps forward first.
And you just made me think about it, is it really reinforces the importance of having a dialogue around these issues.
Yeah.
Because far too often it's somebody standing there who's an authority, who's dressed real nice, and they seem to be the only one in the room who has something to say. But when you get people involved in the dialogue, it helps them tap into their own lived experience and realize, I've got a thing or two to contribute as well. So I much prefer this, because we need to empower the community. And this is a beautiful contribution you're making to that end.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do hope that people feel invited into the conversation that you and I are having, because so you were talking about, do you want more kindness in the world? Then be kind, right? Doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. To expand beyond that is, the more we can figure out who we are without the other rules, right? We tend to spend so much time in our thought of who we're not. That comparative of, I don't fit the way society says I'm supposed to fit. I don't learn the way school says I'm supposed to learn. I don't even sit in a chair the way I'm told is polite, right? And I'm one knee up, one leg over here, right? Most of us who are able to, sit in chairs in unique ways because we're just always kind of like, us. The more we are willing to put us out into the world, the more us there is in the world. And that's the world I want. I want whoever you are, whatever it is you shine at, and whatever it is that's troubling you, I want you out in the world so that we can celebrate what you want us to celebrate, and we can help with what you need help with, and vice versa, right? If I put me out into the world, people can celebrate with me the things I want to celebrate, and they can help me find solution for things I need solutioning.
And one of the things that we may have to contribute to the larger world is modeling self-acceptance. Because where everybody else can wear this perfect mask and have you convinced that they have it all together, we can't hide quirky 100%. Stuff just breaks through. So in having to learn to be okay with that, because there's only so much you can do, and learning how to navigate when people push back, like, hey man, what's up with you, weirdo? To be able to handle that gracefully and with humor, imagine what message that sends to everyone else who thinks, I can't possibly be lovable unless I keep this mask on. But then hear all of us saying, take the mask off, it's fine, hang out with us.
I love that.
Yeah.
That deeper impact. There's a wonderful quote that I love that a lot of people know from a woman named Marianne Williamson, and she talks about being yourself, and that when you are yourself, you unconsciously give others permission to do the same. And that was something that really lit up my life a number of years ago when I found that quote was, yeah, actually, so many people have come to me and said, your willingness to just be you, even when people give you a hard time or, are really harsh with you or whatever, you just maintain you.
Well, and one
And
thing I learned along with the kindness thing, I could say I'm having a hard time or someone else is giving me a hard time. Well, the other side of that is they're having a hard time.
yeah. Yep. There's a reason for their behavior. It doesn't mean we have to accept their behavior. We don't have to take abuse in our life. That's not appropriate either.
Mhm.
But I do believe we are more capable of surviving when we understand that, like you were talking about before, try not to take it as personally. They wouldn't treat you badly if they figured out how to treat people well, right?
Oh, yeah. Boundaries are essential. I mean, yeah, I understand you have the flu, but that doesn't mean I want you puking all over me.
Right.
Go home and get better and you sort it out, and then we'll get together for lunch. Like somebody else's toxicity or somebody else's trauma. I feel for you, but that doesn't mean I agree to be your whipping post.
Right. Right. But if we maintain a consciousness of that behavior is there because they're going through a thing,
Mm-hmm. And
then
it's
we don't
not
have to take it so personally. Right.
precisely. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when your thoughts about be more of an observer, right? We can observe a behavior and we can decide if we want to participate. We can decide if we want to take it on as something we hold or not. And I think when we really embrace that style of thinking, the observer and choice maker, we are less likely to put ourselves in abusive situations, put ourselves in spaces that are toxic. Because I do think when you grow up with so many people telling you you're wrong, you're bad, you're stupid, you're whatever, right? All of us as neurodivergent people have heard enough of that. And a lot of us have let it get into our heads and become the way we speak to ourselves now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we can start observing that stuff and deciding, do I want that? Is that how I want it? And understanding the difference between what actually is and what has been given to us that we have accepted, right? Your value is because you breathe. Right?
Yeah.
Period.
If you're breathing, the trees thank you.
There you go. I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. If you're
Because
breathing, please, thank you.
because you're contributing to it. We have a symbiotic relationship with the trees. Our carbon dioxide, they take it in and they produce oxygen. It's win-win.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Oh, I'm carrying that one with me for a very long time. Thank you for that. But yeah, if we can start with the idea that we have intrinsic value, then we can start observing and choosing what we want to put into the world, like you were saying with the kindness. Do you want more kindness in the world?
The more conscious and deliberate you are, the greater your impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes right back to what we were talking about in the beginning. If you are conscious and deliberate with the idea that life comes with hard and pleasant, right? Difficult and easy, light and dark. If we start there and we observe and choose and ask for help.
Yes.
Right?
Ask until.
Ask until. Oh my gosh, this has been a beautiful conversation. I am going to be thinking about this for a very, very long time. I feel very benefited by having met you and had the privilege of speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
And it's an absolute delight. I'm glad we were able to connect.